of Lake Bluff's Finance Committee meeting. This is Monday, November 14th, 2022. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Oh, wow. Double, triple.
Okay. Member Rappin? Oh, I'm sorry. Just we did it. Member Ryder
Present?
and Chair Ankerman.
Here.
Okay.
And so at this point in time, we have received notice in advance of 4 hours or more before the meeting that Steve Rappin, member of the Finance Committee, will not be able to attend in person due to business reasons. And if there is no objection from any other members present, he would like to participate telephonically. Are there any objections?
No objections for me.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes from our October 24th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting. Copies have been distributed, and in reviewing, have there been any corrections, updates, changes requested? Okay. Hearing none. Do I have an emotion then to approve the minutes?
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unless we need to do that by roll call. Okay, next, we have left some time for any non-agenda items and visitors to the meeting. If there's, I see nobody in the room, but if there's anyone who would like to address the Finance Committee, the committee allocates 15 minutes at this time for individuals who'd like the opportunity to address the committee on any matter listed that is not on this evening's agenda. So we don't have anyone in this room, we don't have anyone attending virtually. So we are on to the next business items for discussion. The first is a discussion regarding the draft FY 2022 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, also affectionately known as the CAFR, and the auditor's communications to the board. So Bettina, would you like to introduce our member from Sikich? Are they available? Okay.
Yes,
Awesome, thank you.
there she is.
Hi, Martha.
Hello. Martha Trotter, a partner from Sikich, is here to discuss and review the audit for fiscal year '22. And I'll let her take that part away. We've had a little bit of change to process. I don't know if you want to address that a little bit. We were more remote, I think, than maybe even prior years. Part of the time I was absent due to a family illness. So we had some other accounting firms step in and do some of the extra work, and then I stepped back in when we were reviewing and caught up to where they were. So I'll leave that with Martha. Thank you.
Thank you. So as Bettina noted, I'm Martha Trotter. I'm the partner on the village's audit engagement for the fiscal year ending April 30th, 2022. And I'll be presenting to you the reports that we've issued as part of the audit. So with focus on the annual comprehensive financial report for the fiscal year ended April 30th, 2022, and the board communication. And I'll address, there are a handful of other reports that are issued as part of the audit procedures. My focus will be on those two reports, but I will address the other reports that are issued as well. And to assist with the review of these reports, I'll share my screen. So please let me know if that's coming through for you.
Yes.
Yep.
Looks great.
It's very pretty.
So thank you all for having me here tonight, and I do appreciate the flexibility of being able to join on Zoom. My 1.5-year-old will definitely appreciate that at bedtime. So as part of our annual audit, we have issued the annual comprehensive financial report, the board communication, the management letter in accordance with Illinois compiled statutes, the IMRF allocation report, the GATA cipher report, and we've also assisted with, or in the process of assisting with, the comptroller annual financial reporting, which we anticipate will be submitted hopefully prior to Thanksgiving, and have assisted with the preparation and submission of the Illinois Department of Insurance reporting. So There's always a lot of information that is requested as part of our audit procedures, and I want to first and foremost give a huge thank you to Bettina and Steve and the finance staff, limited finance staff. It's quite a lot of information that we ask for and review in order to be able to issue our opinion on the financial statements and to ensure that we've completed a thorough audit. So that information has been provided to us on a timely basis. And although there were some changes to the scheduling and few items, revisions to information from outside parties that were required, we still issued the report timely and have received the village has received the appropriate extension from the Government Finance Officers Association to submit the annual comprehensive financial report, and the comptroller filing will be submitted on time with the extended deadline. So I do want to address that there is a lot of information that's requested as part of the audit, and we were able to receive everything. And although there were some changes to the schedule, have no issues or difficulties in obtaining the information that was required to complete our audit procedures. So I will first take you through the annual comprehensive financial report. And the annual comprehensive financial report is made up of 3 sections. There's the introductory section, the financial section, and the statistical section. Within the introductory section, you'll find the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. And I want to highlight this. This was awarded to the village for the prior year annual comprehensive financial report that was submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association. And this award or designation is extended to the village to show that the village's financial statements are easily readable and meet the requirements of the Government Finance Officers Association for excellence in financial reporting. So it's a huge honor, a prestigious designation to have, and therefore the certificate for the prior year audit is included in this year's report. And we fully anticipate the village to be a recipient of the Certificate of Achievement for the FY22 report that is in front of you. Following the Certificate of Achievement, you'll find the letter of transmittal. This is prepared by village finance staff, and it's a good section of the report to read. It provides a summary and overview of the report. It provides information on the profile of the village and also discusses initiatives for the current year and also for the future fiscal years. So this is a good summary that's prepared by the village, and it extends through from pages Roman numeral 4 through Roman numeral 10. Those are the 2 key items that make up the introductory section of the report. Now I'm moving on to the financial section of the report. And first and foremost, in the financial section of the report, this is where you'll find our independent auditor's report. And this is where you'll locate the opinion that we've been able to issue on the village's basic financial statements. And on behalf of SICICH, I am pleased to present a unmodified opinion on the village's financial statements. This is the highest level of assurance that we can provide. Our audit, as discussed in the independent auditor's report, was conducted in accordance with audit standards generally accepted in the United States of America, or GAAS, as well as government auditing standards. And the government auditing standards is a requirement due to the level of grant activity the village had for this fiscal year. So that's an additional standard of compliance that we completed our audit in association with. And that is due to the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act of the state of Illinois, where whenever there is grant activity over 500,000, that additional GAAS audit is required. One thing to note regarding the independent auditor's report is in prior years, the opinion was listed on the second page, and due to some changes in auditing standards, the opinion is now found on page 1 of the independent auditor's report. So a little bit easier to locate. Following the independent auditor's report, you'll find the management's discussion and analysis. And I always say, if there's no other section of the report that you read, I would highly recommend reading the management's discussion and analysis. This is another section that is prepared by the village's finance staff. It provides a great deal of context and information to the balances that are presented in the report itself, but what it includes is some additional analysis and some graphical information and comparative information that is not found in the basic financial statements. So if you're looking to see some analysis as to why balances changed the way they did, what caused certain variances, and an easy summarized comparison of current year to prior year, the management discussion and analysis is a great place to find that type of information. And this serves as an executive summary of the report. Following the management's discussion and analysis, I'll take you into the basic financial statements. So these begin with the statement of net position on pages 5 through 6 and are followed by the statement of activities on pages 7 and 8. The statement of net position and statement of activities are presented on an economic resources focus of accounting and accrual basis. So this is a long-term view of the village's total operations. The information is presented for governmental activities, which are all the village's governmental funds, and the business type activities, which encompass the water fund of the village, taking you to a total column. What the long-term focus presented on these statements includes that you don't normally see incorporated into the monthly financials that you review are long-term assets and long-term liabilities, such as the net pension asset, as is the case for this fiscal year, the IMRF net pension asset, capital assets, net of accumulated depreciation. Those are balances that are included in these total assets balances. There's also long-term liabilities, such as any of the village's long-term debt related to the police pension, net pension liability, OPEB liability, any outstanding debt obligations of the village. Those are incorporated into these liability balances. And there are also items related to timing differences related to the IMRF and police pension and OPEB. Those are deferred outflows of resources and deferred inflows of resources. One thing that I would like to highlight regarding the information presented here is for the fiscal year ended April 30th, 2022. There was a $2.3 million increase overall in governmental activities net position, and that you can find on the statement of activities. Page 8, you'll see here the change in net position for the fiscal year, $2.3 million to governmental activities and $314,000 for business type activities. So overall, the village ended the fiscal year in a better position financially than it began the fiscal year. Following the full accrual basic financial statements and beginning on page 9 is where you can locate the governmental funds balance sheet presented to you on a current financial resources measurement focus and modified accrual basis of accounting. So what's included here is those long-term assets and liabilities are not incorporated. This is a more of a near-term focus presentation. And you'll find that there is information for the general fund and for all the other villages' governmental funds in total in the non-major governmental funds column on these financial statements. And that is what our opinion is over. So our opinion is on the general fund, which is the village's only major fund individually, and the non-major governmental funds in total. And you'll also find more information on what makes up the non-major governmental funds, each of those individual non-major governmental funds, balance sheet and statement of the schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Further into the report, I'll show you where you can locate that information. From these financial statements, one thing I wanted to point out to you, as you see here, the general funds fund balance on April 30th, 2022 ended at 9.8 million. And on page 11, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances of the governmental funds, you'll see that that was an increase to the fund balance from the beginning of the year of 891,654. The non-major governmental funds also showed an increase in fund balance of 961,559 for the year. Of the general fund's fund balance, 7.5 million of that balance is unassigned and available for village operations. Following the governmental funds financial statements, on pages 13 through 16 is the information for the village's water fund. And this is presented similarly as that business type activities column on the statement of net position and statement of activities. This is also presented on a full accrual basis of accounting. So here you will find those long-term assets and liabilities incorporated here. There's a little bit higher level of detail of the information here that's not shown on the statement of net position and statement of activities, but there are no changes to the balances overall from these two, the presentation of these statements. And then also within the basic financial statements, you'll find the fiduciary fund or the police pension fund's statement of fiduciary net position and statement of changes in fiduciary net position for the police pension fund. And you'll see here on the statement of changes in fiduciary net position, the police pension fund had a decrease in fiduciary net position of 837,325 due to the depreciation or the change in fair value of investments for the fiscal year. Following the basic financial statements, you'll find the footnotes to the financial statements. This is pages 21 through 62 of the report. I'm not going to dig into very much detail on the footnotes, just wanted to highlight that here is where you can find information on the village's significant accounting policies. There are also footnotes detailing the village's capital asset activity. Footnote number 4 is where you can find that information. Footnote number 7 discusses the village's long-term debt activities, and you can see the information broken out for governmental as well as for business type activities. And footnote 11 is where you can find some detailed information as to the village's pension funds, so the IMRF and police pension plan, that is located on pages 42 through 57, footnote number 11. There were no GASB pronouncements that were implemented in the current fiscal year that impacted the footnote disclosure presentation, so there were no new disclosures required for this fiscal year and no changes to the reporting from the prior year report. Following the footnotes is a section of the financial statements called the required supplementary information. And this information is required to be presented so you have a budget versus actual for the general fund, the village's major governmental fund. And then also in the required supplementary information is information for the village's OPEB plan, the last 4 fiscal years, and that's all the information that is available. This is building up to 10 years of data. There is information as to the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, so the IMRF plan, schedule of employer contributions, and the same schedule for the police pension fund. So you can see the village's contributions to the IMRF plan and to the police pension plan. Currently, there are 7 and 8 fiscal years of data presented for these, and these are also building up to 10 years. You'll find the village's share of IMRF, net pension liability, or as was the case for the FY22 fiscal year or the 2021 IMRF reporting year, net pension asset, as well as the same information for the police pension fund net pension liability, and this is presented for 8 fiscal years, building up to 10 years of data. Following the required supplementary information are combining and individual fund financial statements. First, you'll find a very detailed budget versus actual presentation for the general fund schedule of revenues as well as schedule of expenditures. This is pages 72 through 77 of the report. There is a great level of detail of the general fund. So if you're looking to see how that general fund performed as compared to the budget, this is where you can locate that information for both revenues and expenditures. And then, as I noted earlier, those balances for the non-major governmental funds, that combining total balance that was presented in the basic financial statements, here is pages 78 through 81 is where you can find the combining balance sheet. So those individual balance sheets for the funds that make up the non-major funds balance are located here. So you have a balance sheet as well as a statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances for those non-major funds that are reported. Following those combining statements, you'll find an individual budget versus actual schedule for each of the village's budgeted non-major governmental funds, the water fund, as well as the police pension fund. That is located on pages 82 through 90 of the report. There is other information or supplemental data on pages 91 through 92 of the report that presents the village's debt obligations. And then the last section or third section of the report that I noted earlier is the statistical section. And this is also a great place to look for information on the village's financial trends, revenue capacity, debt capacity, demographic and economic information, and operating information presented to you on a historical basis. So there is, in most cases, 10 fiscal years of information presented here. So if you're looking to see how fiscal year 2022 ended and how it compares to prior reported years, there is 10 years of information presented here in these statistical schedules on a variety of financial and other information. Before I move on to the other reports, I could take a pause here and see if there's any questions or if there were any sections that anyone would like me to highlight in more detail.
I'm okay to keep going at the end.
I just had a quick question. One of the numbers that kind of stuck out in an unfavorable way would be the change in the overall potential for the pension liability, and you know, that's a reflection of the market. And you know, we can look at it within the village, but you perhaps might have a wider perspective of other businesses and other, you know, municipalities and what that has done to their pension liabilities as well, and how they're covered for that?
Sure. So I believe you're talking about the police pension fund.
Yes.
I noted there was a net decrease in the pension funds, the net position restricted for pension benefits. So it was not uncommon to see a lot of pension funds see a decrease, and that's largely due to the investment activity. April 30th, 2022, as a measurement point, was maybe not the best time for the market. So there were significant losses noted. But as you know, investments fluctuate and are intended to be for the long term. So those, in terms of the net pension liability and how that's measured, we rely on actuarial valuations, and actuaries take into consideration the fluctuations in the market. The investments in these plans are managed by investment managers who tend to take into consideration those fluctuations and assumptions related to where the market could be. Obviously, from year to year, there could be negative fluctuations, as well as you might see years where there's a significant positive net investment appreciation in the value of investments. So timing of when these statements are presented, that April 30th date, that is a large factor as to the value of what those investments were measured at that time.
Thank you. That's it for me.
I guess on that topic, could I just, maybe a reminder from Drew, the investment, who decides on the financial investments for the pension fund? Who does that?
So in the past, the police pension board had some oversight into the investments along with a manager that was contracted through the police pension board. That has recently changed to the consolidated state fund, and the state now has pooled all the police pension dollars, or at least most of them, and is the keeper of the investment.
Okay, so that's being done at a state level, not at our level at all.
Not anymore. It used to be our level, but not anymore. So as of this audit, the information presented would have still have included investment decisions based on our boards and our investment manager. Moving forward next year, they would not be.
But even the state sets up what prescribes by law, what vehicles are
Yes.
even accessible to the
Right.
village.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And then, Martha, I could ask you, could you just for clarity, the liabilities for the pension fund versus the assets, how much is the gap?
Sure, I can show you that schedule. That will. Are you specifically looking for the police pension fund?
Yeah.
Results? So the net pension liability, that balance is $11,965,700 at April 30th, 2022. That was noting that increase in the liability of 10.1 million last year.
Okay.
And as you see, that number has, for the most part, trended up from the inception of this GASB pronouncement in 2015.
And Martha, below that, you had the percentage.
The percentage funded, yes.
Yeah.
So as you see here, this plan fiduciary net position as a percentage of total pension liability, that's the percentage funded of the plan historically. So that has remained in the mid-50s, between 50 and mid-50s. Of course, that balance is also calculated and takes into consideration how those investments and other assumptions impacted the liability for each fiscal year.
And the periodic, I guess the timeline we're looking at is 2040, right?
To be fully
Or-
funded.
To be fully funded.
Yep.
Yep. We're still over 50%. Let's look at that.
I appreciate your optimistic outlook.
That's awesome.
Martha, I ask as well that you had mentioned the $7.5 million of availability, financial availability. Is there a sense of how that compares to past years?
So yeah, actually the statistical schedules is where you can find some historical information regarding that fund balance, and I believe it should be that one up as well. Here you go. There is a statistical schedule called Fund Balances of Governmental Funds that begins on page 101 of the financial statements, and the general fund is presented individually, so you can see that unassigned fund balance beginning, and we have back to 2013 presented. So here's that 7.5 million of unassigned fund balance in the general fund.
Great. Yeah, looks pretty consistent the past few years. Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next section.
Barbara,
Oh,
Excuse me, one moment, yeah.
so can I please ask either Martha or yourself, so what would be a good, you said that the funding of that balance for the pension is at 50%. What should be a good number?
Well, it'll be 100% in 2040. And so if you look at the difference between the two, we need to make incremental steps along the way to get there. And that date may be pushed further back at some future point in time, but right now, that's what it looks like. So the number of years would be 2022, 2040, that's 18 years to get there, right?
Right.
Right. And of course, everything changes along the way. You have a certain number of people in the pool. Some people drop out of the pool because they pass away. Additional people go in. So it's a moving target all along the way.
And so, I mean, the answer 100% is, it's
Well-
not the answer that I got about 2 years ago that was more in the 70%. Is there an answer, knowing that people will drop out of the pool, knowing that the investment will differ over a year after year? Here we're losing money. What is a 50% mandate below at this point? What would be a reasonable answer? Somewhat to 100%.
What is a reasonable answer to where we should be now? Well, we are a function of all the past decisions. This is where we are now. So it's a function of every past decision that was made historically, and a function of every person who was in the pool and then left the pool. So this is a point in time, it's a snapshot, and this is where we are. And what goes into and out of the pool will continue to change based on how many officers we have and how many retire and how many pass away. The market will continue to change, and we have the end goal of 2040 being where we're required to be.
Right.
But we don't even know today where that number will be, because how many of those people will still be alive? It continues to change, right?
As well as the mortality tables, the assumptions going
right.
into the, you know.
Right,
the
and so
actual-
this year, the mortality tables did change as well. And as a police pension board, we looked at the interest rate of return as well, and collectively decided amongst the board that we wouldn't change the mortality table and the investment rate of return at the same time, because that would have substantially increased the investment. So next year, there'll probably be a board decision on the police pension board side to reduce the rate of return, to mirror the states. I think the state's at 6.8 or 6.75, and we're at 7. So, you know, that quarter of a percentage down will also change the contribution.
To the negative.
Right.
Right.
So, I mean, those rates are just the best guess of what over time you can expect to get as a return. And the mortality tables reflect the best guess as to how long people will live. And so all of those factors go in, you shake it up, divide it by, you know, how much time you've got left, and that is your contribution that you make to make those baby steps along the way, so that at the end goal,
Hopefully you're
theoretically-
closer to it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't anticipate having to hire more police officers in the future, do we? Outside of the set number we have right now?
That is not, no, is the answer. Operations have not considered bringing on additional officers. But we're running the similar, most departments run the similar type staffing model of minimum officers to meet, you know, a safe number to manage the demand for services that we experience.
So
And
we
if you-
can anticipate that being relatively stable going
Which is
forward.
good and bad, in that, you know, a much bigger organization has many more lives and many more different people and different timeline of where they are in terms of, some people are gonna be with that organization they have many more people at the early end feeding that same investment for a much longer term than having people at the tail end. Lake Bluff, for whatever reason, I'm not certain yet, but Village started a police pension fund before it was required to do so as a matter of law. It decided to offer that benefit to its police officers. There's a threshold when you're of a population of 5,000, you have to do it. And the village chose to do it before it reached that population, for some reason. And so it's harder, it's a difficult model to make work with as few officers in a community our size. It's difficult to work. So we are somewhat optimistic that this pooling will help improve some of this for us. At least it's,
I think the market really contributed to what you're seeing as the losses
for
this
certain,
year.
but you could look
Yeah,
over time, you know,
more
there's
predominantly.
times where we have great, you know, whatever happens in the market happens here, but it's, you know, we're starting from,
And as Martha alluded to, the snapshot date that we have of April 30th, someone else may have had a different ending date, a December
Right.
date, and, you know, their picture could look a whole lot different from a reporting standpoint.
Right.
and over the years, the village has asked a lot of these same questions. We've met with the actuary and they said, hey, is it advantageous for us to do a, like, double or triple our investment one year? And they say no, because you could have another really bad year and you could, like, you know, throw that money away essentially. So they say, stick with the investment model, you know, be smart with your assumptions, alter your, you know, your rates to meet what's happening in the market, and try not to do that all at once so you don't have a big, you know, bite in one particular year, but it's the best the village can do.
Yeah, slow and steady is
Yeah.
the way to swallow that elephant.
Right, one bite at a time.
Right.
And as time passes, you'll have more and more Tier 2 police officers also that are hired onto the department, which is a different set of benefits, slightly reduced in some aspects. That'll change the whole formulation a little bit too, so that will change the picture as well.
I have a different question on a different topic. Change the topic.
Do we want to do it with, at this point with Martha? I just wanted to be cognizant of Martha, so
Oh,
that's
sure.
all. Is, it-
It's probably something that you can answer.
okay,
But
okay, go ahead, go ahead.
So on
Looking at
page
me like,
10
let her ask her question.
Page 101 and 102, you were pointing to the unassigned general fund being
Yes.
relatively stable over time, 6, 7, in that vicinity. But I noticed that through, let's see, 2014 all the way up to 2020, that assigned amount was always 300,000, very routinely. But 2021 and 2022, those numbers are much higher, 1.5 and 2.1. Can you describe what the difference is between assigned and unassigned? And are
Sure.
we looking at that total fund balance
Yes.
or?
So there are categories of fund balance. So as you note here, non-spendable and restricted. So non-spendable is anything that's tied up and not readily available to spend. So that would be related to prepaid items. So that's associated with assets that have been prepaid. So you cannot actually, that's not liquid asset or liquid fund balance. Restricted fund balance is restricted by outside sources. So that is more common to see here in the other governmental funds where you have restrictions of set by outside parties related to, for instance, a property tax levy. So balances revenues levied for specific restricted purposes, or grant fund balance tied up related to grant activity where that fund balance is restricted for specific purposes of to be spent on those grant activities. Unrestricted fund balance, there's the assigned category that's essentially earmarked. So the board, it doesn't require formal board action to change that assignment of fund balance. It's more of a presentation to show that a portion of this fund balance is assigned or intended to be used for instance, a capital outlay, future capital projects is a common assignment to see. Now, the increase here that you commented on in 2021 and 2022, this is due to taking into consideration the future upcoming fiscal year budget. And anytime the village has budgeted a deficit, whether or not the actual balances will line up with the budget, and the village will actually see a deficit. If there is a budgeted deficit, we have incorporated that into the assignment because the ending fund balance at April 30th, 2022 is intending to be used towards funding that deficit that the village has budgeted. So that's what caused that increase here. That presentation was changed in 2021 to incorporate that budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. So it's still available for the village's use and operations. It's just a presentation that this is a piece of this fund balance is earmarked or assigned for funding that budgeted deficit in the general fund.
So Martha, in prior years, when you see that 300,000, so in 2020 and prior, that statement analysis or statement calculation wasn't the same, is what you're saying?
Correct. And that assignment relates to capital outlay.
So going forward, you'll see that number always be different than the 300,000.
Imagine. But does that mean that our fund balance is actually up the last 2 years from 7.8 in 2020 to 8.9 to 2021, and then 2022, 9.8?
9.8 is the total fund balance of the general fund.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more questions regarding the financial statements?
I think we are done with questions regarding the financial statements.
Okay, I'll briefly cover the board communication. So the board communication is it's required by auditing standards to be a certain information in this report that we issue is a requirement of our auditing standards to be communicated to those charged with governance. Within the board communication, what I'll highlight for you is some of these required items that our auditing standards guide us to communicate. So here we have, as I noted earlier, there were no GASB pronouncements that impacted the reporting or calculation of balances or footnote presentation. There was one GASB pronouncement that was implemented for this fiscal year, and that was GASB Statement 98, and that just changed the title of the report. So you may have noticed at the report cover and all references to the financial statements are the annual comprehensive financial report. That was the only pronouncement that impacted the village's report this year. So nothing related to the presentation of balances or disclosures within the report itself. We also have a section here where we discuss significant accounting estimates, and we had quite a detailed discussion on the actuarial valuations and those net pension liability or net pension asset balances that are presented in the report. Here in the board communication, we do address that as auditors, we rely on the actuarial's valuations, which are based off of assumptions that are taken into account for the calculation of those balances. So we just highlight here that we consider those to be significant estimates, as there's a lot of expert analysis, and we rely on the actuaries who are the experts over how those assumptions are created and reflected and calculated to get to those net pension liability balances or the OPEB liability, or the in the case of IMRF, the net pension asset, and those related deferred outflows and inflows that are presented on the full accrual basis financial statements. So we disclose that here. On page 3 of the board communication, we discuss difficulties encountered in performing the audit, which we had none to disclose. As I noted earlier, the audit taking into consideration some scheduling changes and some reports from outside parties, all in all went well, and we had no difficulties in getting the information that we needed in order to provide our opinion and complete our audit testing. We have no audit adjustments that were uncorrected, and we have no material audit adjustments. So in this corrected and uncorrected misstatements paragraph, none of the audit adjustments that were proposed and reported by the village in the reported balances were material to the financial statements. And we had no disagreements with management. So throughout the audit process, once again, a very smooth audit process, no disagreements with management. Obviously, this would not be the first time it would come to your attention if there had been any, but also just required to highlight that here. And Within the board communication, so as I noted, there were some audit adjustments that were recommended and recorded by the village. None of these were material to the financial statements. There is a list of these here. And then also, probably the most important section or most of interest to you, the communication of deficiencies in internal controls and other comments to management. Here, if we had noted any items that we consider to be material weaknesses or significant deficiencies throughout our audit testing, this is where we would communicate these. And I would just like to highlight that we did not note any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that we need to communicate to management. And also, there were no other comments or items that were considered to be deficiencies or other comments. So what is included in this communication of deficiencies is just a list of future accounting pronouncements that we will be working with the village to make sure that these are implemented into the reporting as they come due to be implemented. So there is a pretty lengthy list of GASB pronouncements upcoming for future fiscal years. We work with the village finance and accounting department to ensure that these are properly implemented and incorporated into the report on a timely basis. There is also an ILCS or Illinois Compiled Statutes Management Letter. So this is a summary of that board communication that is required by the state of Illinois to be posted. So this is in memo format. And this just once again highlights that there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that we noted from our audit procedures. I also just wanted to highlight that none of the board communication and the management letter, we don't issue an opinion on internal controls. We don't perform any sort of internal control testing. That's a higher level of testing that's required for specific compliance reporting. However, for audit reporting, no tests of internal controls are completed. So we do not issue an opinion on the village's internal controls. But we just note that we would note if there were any items that came to our attention and would provide recommendations for improvement if we had any. The IMRF allocation report is a report of how the calculation of the overall IMRF net pension liability or asset is allocated between the village and the library. I'm not going to go into the details of these balances here, but the balance that's reported in the village's report is for the village's share of the overall IMRF asset, actually in April 30, 2022 reporting, and a portion is allocated to the library as the library is on a cost sharing plan with the village. And then finally, there is an additional report that's required due to the level of grant activity the village had for the fiscal year. The Illinois Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, anytime a village has over $500,000 of grant activity, this additional report is required. And here we do, once again, discuss internal controls over financial reporting and report on compliance and other matters. However, once again, just to highlight, no opinion is issued on those internal controls. We do issue an opinion on the consolidated year-end financial report that's filed with the SCADA agency in relation to the financial statements. So we review the grant balances for the fiscal year in relation to the audit testing that was performed, and we verify that these balances align with what was reported in the annual comprehensive financial report, so that we issue our opinion on these balances as they relate to the financial statements.
Thank you. I had just one question about the future pronouncements. I know there are a number that are kind of on the horizon, but do any of them particularly apply to our village in terms of needing to change our procedures or, hire somebody because this is now a more burdensome or detailed obligation for reporting? Is there anything that you see having a significant impact to us?
Sure. So actually, the GASB statement number 87 on leases is due to be implemented in April 30th, 2023, so this current fiscal year. And shortly thereafter for the FY24 fiscal year is GASB Statement 96, that's subscription-based information technology arrangements, which is similar to the lease standard, but specific to IT contracts and agreements. And we will be having planning meetings in preparation for the FY23 audit with Bettina and her staff. There could potentially be, especially for the IT arrangements, because of the village, we have to take a look at every single IT contract and consider whether or not it falls under GASB 96. And similarly with the more closer to be implemented lease standard, we have to look at every single lease or rental agreement contract or any type of arrangement that could potentially be considered a lease and determine whether or not it falls under GASB 87 reporting. So there could potentially be a lot of information requests in order to ensure that we have the complete data to analyze and calculate the impact of those two pronouncements. And that's upcoming for FY23 for the lease standard and FY24 for the IT standard.
Is it that
We offer, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it that we might have to report something more of a liability out on the balance sheet?
Exactly, so that statement of net positions and statement of activities
Right.
is where it will impact, and for the water fund, because that's presented on a full accrual basis of accounting, it's a long-term right to use of those assets in the sense of a lease. So yes, there's a liability, but also a asset that's amortized over the course of the life of the lease.
Okay, thank you.
Martha,
Complicated.
is there a de minimis threshold to that 87 pronouncement?
We will be, not de minimis, but we always take into consideration materiality for the village when analyzing those types of contracts, and we would have to look at every single contract in totality, the ones that are applicable when taking that materiality threshold into consideration.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or questions from any other members? Well, yes. What I wanted to say is that this is just a lot of information, so I wanted to thank Bettina and everyone helping Bettina gather that information. I wanted to thank Martha for kind of walking us through all of this information. There's a lot here, and it's very helpful to have you have that, just walk it through it for us. I noticed there were lots of good things, like no material misstatements and, just everything that you want to hear in an audit, we found, in here. It's not a full audit, but I mean, in the preparation of all these reports, nothing was found, no material misstatements, no big entries that we need to be concerned about. And that's what we expect, and that's what we hear every year. So thank you for all your hard work, and thank you, Martha, again, for putting this together and walking us through the presentation.
Thank you as well. And I do appreciate it, your time. I was not anticipating to go into so much detail, but I think hopefully it was helpful to everyone. And of course, if any questions come up as you continue to review the reports, they can be routed to me.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay.
Chair and Committee, I think just looking for a recommendation to accept the report for the village board from the Finance Committee would be helpful.
Yes, do I have a recommendation to accept the report?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed? Okay, thank you. I am looking for my agenda. Here we go. All right, so next we have our continued discussion regarding the historic preservation financial incentives. And Drew, do you want to kind of just give us
Yeah, just
a
a
brief
quick
overview?
overview, and the HBC chair, Paul Bergman, is here tonight. I provided some additional information that he shared regarding some incentives way down in Texas. Plano is doing. So those are in front of you. I don't know if you had a chance to read them, but a quick overview where this conversation was discussed at length, or I'm sorry, that was had at length at the last meeting, and there seemed to be general consensus around further revisions to the village's current incentive policies with respect to fee waivers, and then there was some more discussion around rebates, and then there was some general questions that came up about the recent historic preservation incentives put together in Hinsdale. Glenn was sent on a mission and met with them, and the memo, Glenn assures me there's nothing else to squeeze from Hinsdale for information, but he's happy to answer any questions if there are, or clarity's sake, about the memorandum, and hopefully this answered the questions that were brought up at the meeting, but that's nutshell.
Okay, so again, I'll just kind of look at what we're looking at are some options for the Finance Committee to consider for providing an incentive for what the HPC has as its goal for the homeowners to landmark their properties and ultimately continue to keep and invest in these beautiful, historic, architecturally significant homes in our village. So we talked about providing a local property tax rebate, and the HPC suggested for new landmarks a 50% rebate limited to $2,000 for up to 8 years. So that would be, if the maximum happened, that would be 8 years times $2,000. For 8 years would be $16,000 for a home. And then it also recommended a 50% rebate limited to $2,000 for 1 year only for homes that are current landmarks. So we discussed going back and forth quite a bit about the percentage, the new landmarks versus existing landmarks, and the length of the rebate time period, whether, for new being just 1 or new landmarks being 5, 8, whatever number of years. And so our approach was to gather more data, and looking at the property tax rebate, we also wanted to look at it in conjunction with the building permit fee waiver option. Presently, there is a 25% building permit fee waiver for landmarks, and it was recommended for our consideration to increase this to 100%. And a building permit fee is 3% of the value of the construction. Looking at the two options with the property tax rebate and the building permit fee waiver, there are some positives and that each of them exhibit. The building permit fee waiver really looks at the investment portion of what a homeowner will do. It rewards homeowners who are investing in their homes by offering that fee waiver. And so for our consideration is waiving, increasing that waiver to 100%. So property tax rebate and the building permit fee waiver can be looked at in conjunction, addressing two different aspects of incentivizing. So with all of that being said, Steve or any other member, or Susan, do you have any further thoughts on how to kind of piece all this together?
I have a couple of questions regarding Hinsdale. Sure. Even though you've squeezed everything out. The $50,000 minimum investment, is that just supposed to be over at one time or over the course of time? Do you know?
I don't think they know quite yet. I think the expectation would be one project, but I'm not sure that the alternative is not available.
And so that's in order to get the property tax rebate. The other clarification I wanted to identify is that this is a separate program from the landmarking program. They're calling it historically significant structures, I think, something other than landmarking.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance here. So a big part of it is Hinsdale implemented this whole program in the context of their zoning regulations. And so they have a list of properties that are eligible to access these. It's really separate from but parallel to landmarking, so a
I see.
property can get these and not be landmarked or vice versa. That's for a few reasons, including legally how they set it up, and also I thought interesting. There was a perception there that some property owners would not accept landmarking. That the
Because that bars them
existence-
from
yeah.
tearing it down altogether, it sounds like. In Hinsdale, where I read, in Hinsdale, if it's landmarked, it can't be taken down. They have to get it unlandmarked in order to take it down. So, of course, that's a different kind of commitment.
Correct.
Okay, so probably what Hinsdale does is not either here or there. It's just interesting. I think what's very interesting to me is this question of earning the tax rebate as opposed to simply getting it for landmarking, thereby not getting it if you landmarked last year. That makes sense to me from an equity perspective, from a perspective of trying to drive the behaviors that we're trying to drive. I think if over the course of time, $50,000 minimum investment is cumulative rather than a single one, that people are going to meet that minimum investment over, do a couple bathrooms, and you've invested in your
You'd be surprised.
what? Yeah, oh, okay, one bathroom. Do one bathroom. Certainly do a kitchen. So that's what appeals to me. We've been having this kind of debate whether A, property tax rebates at all make sense, but B, if they do make sense, does it make sense to do anything retroactively? That's always sort of bothered me, although I understand sort of what we're trying to do there. So what I think, looking at this, one other thing that I wanted to identify is the tax rebates were subject to the availability of funds from a separate historical preservation fund, a grant program for historical buildings.
We don't have such a thing.
Yeah, right.
I don't know that we necessarily want to create such a thing. And it
Right.
also said that it was funded by donations, so there's,
It's structured to allow for private
well,
donations.
yeah, but otherwise, they had X number of dollars available. So it's probably a, first come, first served, and when the fund is depleted, there's nothing more to award.
To rebate, right? And what it struck me about it is that they're primarily funding it with government funds, isn't it sort of just the same? They're taking money from the tax rolls, putting it into a fund, and then paying it back out to certain people, which is essentially the same as just rebating from the taxes. Yeah,
it's limited-
unless there's private dollars.
Well, and so they're limiting they're limiting the exposure to the municipality by saying it's X dollars. And if someone wants to further this type of activity, they can either donate, or maybe the Historic Preservation Committee can solicit donors to,
Yeah.
contribute to this. I don't really know how they do it, but they do carve it out, if you will, in some designated funds. And when we talked about our exposure, we didn't limit it by saying, here are the dollars. We said, what is the likelihood and what is the maximum? And given historical numbers of people who are landmarking, what do we anticipate based on, this is the list of homes that would be great if we could get landmarked, what do we think is going to actually happen? And so those are the only bumpers that we've put on it, which is just trying to be reasonable in our projections. But we've not carved out funds, we've not solicited donations, we've not done anything like that. So,
Right.
Steve, any comments regarding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My comment, I haven't really wavered a whole lot. From a broad sense, I think what we're trying to do is retain the character of Lake Bluff and the housing stock, and that is a worthy investment in my mind. And if we as a group think that's a worthy investment, then I think we ought to incentivize it. So I would be of the opinion that we would give 100% of a permit fee waiver, that we would do the tax rebate of up to $2,000. I could caveat that with the fact that that would require at least an annual $2,000 investment in your home. So, right, because what we don't want are people buying historic homes and then just letting them lapse and look terrible. We want them to continue to invest in them. But that's not critically important to me. So I am for both of those. I think we should provide those incentives. I don't think the look back at providing that tax rebate to people who made decisions in the past is necessarily the right thing to do, because I think they got to those decisions on their own for a different set of criteria, and now we're trying to incentivize something new looking forward. So, if I were to make a motion, I would accept what the ABR or the Historic Preservation Committee put forth, with the exception of the look back.
So are you making that motion?
And my motion would be slightly different.
And what would you like to put out?
My motion would be that we do 100% of the permit fees waiver, and that we do allow for the tax rebate, but only after an investment of some funds is made into the home. So one qualifies not just by establishing it as a landmark, not just by investing, but by doing both. And thereafter, they can get a tax rebate.
I like the idea of that, but every time we have an idea, we've got to think about, well, what are the practical ways that this would be enacted, checked? What are we going to have people do? Bring in receipts? I mean, how, and if it's really only at a small level, like $2,000, I mean, that's one water heater. I mean, that to me seems like a bar that's not really.
You mean for the tax rebate qualification, or?
I just don't, I think that the first one, the landmarking for the property tax rebate, everyone has to upkeep their home to some level. I don't know that is this really incentivizing something that wouldn't already be done? I don't think it is. I don't really think it's going to.
I agree with.
Yeah.
This. I'll say I agree with that. It is at a $2,000. People need to invest in that just to make their house on a daily basis. So
Right.
that would be silly to ask them to bring in $2,000 of receipts, even though that was my idea.
Well, I understand the thought behind it. The thought behind it is, how could someone take this good-intentioned, program and then make it regrettable?
Right.
Right, it didn't work. There are unintended consequences of how people might try to manipulate it. But I don't think that's actually I don't think that's a real concern.
So my proposal would be that they have to invest they have to invest $50,000, just to pick that number from Hinsdale, and thereafter they qualify as long as they apply for the rebate each year. But the first thing they must do in order to qualify is to do that significant investment in the house, not just a water heater, but significant investment in the house. They've landmarked and they've made a significant investment. Thereafter, for a period of 5 years or a period of 8 years, they're entitled to the rebate if they apply for the rebate, because, right, the rebate doesn't just happen automatically because you're in a landmarked home, as I understood it, right? There's some process. They have to come in and say, remember this investment I made that I proved to you last year? Well, I'm here again. I want my $2,000 rebate.
Yeah. Well, to me, both the property tax rebate and the building permit fee waiver, I look at them as you can do either, or you can do both. You can get a building permit fee waiver if you invest after you have received that landmark designation, but I didn't look at those two as needing to be and. I looked at it as you start out with being landmarked, then when you do your investment, great, you get your building permit fee waiver. And if you don't need to do that, if I don't need to do my kitchen, it looks fine just as it is. I mean, I don't think I should be prohibited from landmarking my home.
No, you can never prohibited, you just
Right, but
don't
you
get
would
the
be
incentive.
Yeah, I just think the incentive is there and we want it to be accessed. I don't, and it looks like we have the chair of the HPC committee who has an opinion he'd like to share.
I see what you mean.
Good evening. Thank you all for having me. I'm Paul Bergman, head of the HPC. In our discussions that have been lengthy, about all of this, we haven't linked the two incentives together. And so if you landmark your house, you just simply landmark your house, and that's good enough. You've gone through the rigmarole and all of the historical analysis to prove the social or the architectural value of your property and landmarked it. Some of the houses that come up for landmarking don't necessarily need an investment, or they don't need an investment the year that they get landmarked. So we haven't linked those two together, but we see those as two different incentives that we
Right.
can offer.
Right.
And in the material I sent you from Plano, Texas, apparently this is a statewide program or a statewide structure, and municipalities may adopt it. There, they waive all fees, all inspection fees, any kind of hot water, I think there's like a hot water inspection fee and all sorts of other funny little things like that. They waive all of those fees, and that is not linked to the tax issue. So I can add that, so thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. So at this point in time, I mean, when I consider what we talked about as potential motions, I'm in favor of having these be an either or. You can do one or the other, or if you qualify, you can do both. I think both of them are valid incentives that, my only concern is, and maybe this is a Drew question, do you feel that our exposure for what might happen, will there be a tsunami? And we will see this tsunami of, applicants and homeowners being awarded, and then the financial impact is massive.
Well, ultimately, the board controls how many landmarks there are, right? So based off our rhythm to date, Chair Bergman, I anticipate a drop of a seed on lake, not a tsunami.
I don't think there's going to be a tsunami of
Okay.
people waiting for this. This is generating some discussion around in the village. People have stopped me, and there is some discussion about this. Construction costs are, really tough, and interest rates are really tough at this point. So there
Yeah.
is some interest in it.
The list of homes
The
that the
list-
HBC has identified is really less than 30 at the end of the day, right?
The list is sort of the nifty 25 or
So it's small.
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
like.
yeah.
Now, that list isn't exclusive. I mean, if someone comes in with a different house, but we've identified these houses. If we got 6 or 8 houses in a year, we'd be just, sort of beside ourselves with
Totally.
with work, yeah.
Right.
So that would be just a bounty of a year. So I don't,
Chair Bergman, there is, you had a conversation, I believe, with somebody, a pending HPC applicant, or one you recommended recently, and that they are interested in pursuing these incentives. I had a
Yes.
conversation with the architect who represents, my client is the one who was, I don't want to say they're waiting, but they would
Yeah.
like to take advantage of these,
Yeah.
should they be
I
done.
I wanted to make sure that applicant knew that all of this work was in the works.
Right.
And I wanted them, I said, you're going to be in charge of the timing on this,
Yeah.
but you may want to consider slowing it down, because
Yeah.
if this committee and the village board moves forward, they don't want to be landmarked and then find out,
Yeah.
Right.
gosh, I could have had a V8,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So to understand your either or, are you saying, let me understand that. So just by landmarking, brand new landmark, this fellow, this family, brand new landmark, they qualify for the rebate. If they thereafter also invest, they could qualify for that as well.
Right, but,
But if you've already been landmarked, you can, when you invest, earn get the
Yes.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
so there is an incentive that an existing landmark home would take advantage of, which
I see.
would be that.
Reduced permit fee,
Right, right,
eliminated.
right.
Yeah, and when you say that if you've already if you're already landmarked and you go for a permit, that's where you're saying there'd be that's the benefit to existing folks.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me.
So do I have a motion regarding our, or do you have another
I'm
question?
No, it makes sense.
anything else?
I think,
You have anything
yeah,
else?
I think it makes sense.
Okay, I'll make the motion. I would,
No?
Drew, you're waving at me.
I'm looking at Glenn. I didn't know if he had anything else to add.
You have something to add?
What this motion was about to be, so I'll see if it's clear.
Okay. So do you want to guide us in what you believe our motion should be? Because I think that might be really
I
helpful.
can make it pretty easy. I think
Oh.
our motion, oh, okay.
Oh, go for it, please, Trustee Rappin.
Well, as I see it, I believe our motion is to move forward with the recommendation of the HPC with the exception of the final piece, which was a rebate for existing landmarked properties.
It's very clear.
It's very clear. So a motion has been made by Member Rappin. Do I have a second?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Paul Bergman for helping us get through that. I know it's been a long process, and we're finally there. Okay, so the last,
This begins to move Lake Bluff to the forefront of preservation statewide.
Yeah.
Rather than being the laggard, rather than being behind.
wow, cutting edge, cutting edge.
Not as cutting edge as Texas or Massachusetts, but moves us up the pecking order.
It's like Bluff style.
Oh, the branding.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. Feel free to stay or leave, whatever you need to do. All right, so our last item on this evening's agenda was a continued discussion regarding the 2022 property tax levy estimates. I'm trying to remember the direction that was given at the last Finance Committee meeting. We talked about the effect of interest rates and cost of living and all these things that are happening. And so a number of our contracts have built into it inflation factors,
Escalators.
Escalators. And so at the end of the last discussion, we said, well, how many contracts are there and what are the percentages? And we're just trying to understand, we have before us a lot of expenses that we need to cover and a lot of decisions to make regarding where we're going to set the levy. And so this is a component to that. So Bettina, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you've gathered?
So in the original packet, there was a version of this memo. There's an updated version that I left at each of your chairs. And basically that includes contract data, the percentage of increase, whether there's a CPI escalator, and the actual expense for fiscal year '23 and an estimated expense for fiscal year '24. I say estimated in regards to some of the labor contracts. I'm making an estimate on what I think they would be and where we're headed in those conversations. So it lists them out and they're for your review. Basically you're looking at you can go look at them. So the largest one being about 50,000 to the police department, IGA for residential. Groot for residential waste collection is about 14,000. Then ambulance services estimated about 27,000. The ones that are related to CPI would be the BSNA, which is our financial software system, Clark Environmental, which is a new contract, Groot, as I already mentioned, and Lake Forest. And Lake Forest, the portion of that is related to the building review services, so it's not their entire contract. There's a quite different lengthy formula behind the ambulance contract.
So when we looked at the overall levy and it maxing out with PTEL at 5%, that is coupled with, other things that are kind of outside our control, such as the pension liability, that contribution going up, and that pretty much eats up, the increase that we would be getting for the levy with that PTEL max.
Right.
So-
And then I guess these would also be things that are technically without your control. They're already
Exactly.
contracted to, so you can see how they would deplete that even further.
Doing very basic math, I divided, 152 divided by 3.7, right, is 4%. So what the increase for all of these is 4%. So it's not insignificant. So we have this amount that we have to pay for the pension plan. And then in addition, these already fixed increases are 4% themselves. Not quite 5%, but we have more than
Right.
that going into the pension increases.
Right, right. So this is just additional data to kind of further bolster what I was hearing from the direction of the committee from last meeting's discussion, that at this point in time, the recommendation most likely would be to take that 5%. And so are we looking for then a motion so that we can then recommend this to the wider board, Drew?
As it stands today, that recommendation that goes in front of the board this evening is the recommendation for the estimate. I think that if there is nothing different so far, and there's no desire to continue having the conversation, unless there's something learned tonight through the estimate, I think you maybe just hold the place and just
Right.
kind of, you don't need to take any formal action at
Okay.
the moment, and see
Okay.
if there's any conversation that comes to the board meeting,
Okay.
and then go from there.
Okay, and so no further questions or, data needed from Susan or Steve? Okay. With our lengthy discussion of the CAFR, we kind of used up a lot of our time, and I know, Drew, you had, as our last item, some information that you wanted to share regarding stormwater infrastructure. Thank you, Bettina.
No, that was my own personal placeholder coming out of Saturday's retreat to say that about the
okay.
public engagement program that was agreed upon. So
Right.
we'll begin those plans to do
Okay.
that and start in the first quarter after the holiday season, so as to make sure people can have a chance to participate, so.
Great.
If that's the case, when are we first expecting that this might go into effect?
Well, you can always choose the effective date in the ordinance.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that would depend on maybe what you hear through the public engagement process
Yeah.
to see if that changes any of the course, but it's an ordinance. It can go in effect as, 2 readings. I mean, that's all it takes in terms of the timing, and I think most of the conversation so far has been, it'd have been nice doing this 5 years ago. So, I mean, that's the comments
Yeah.
that I've heard, so I
Probably-
think the answer is pretty swiftly after that
After
process.
the public engagement.
But that's, in again, your hands in
Right.
recommending that to the board, and then, but it only takes 2 readings of an ordinance.
Right.
And what about the calculations? Does that take a long time to
No.
do? No? So it's going to appear on the water bill presumably?
We've looked at that as part of the planning, and that's part of the answer is no, we can do it through existing utility billing.
Okay. But it's not going to be a complex calculation, individual
No.
houses. It's by zoning districts.
Zoning district, again, where properties are treated in a similar manner in terms of limiting lot coverage, et cetera, and how they develop.
Okay. Oops.
So you don't need a motion saying, let's move forward with public engagement?
To me, that direction was given already.
Yeah.
It was just, if there's something different or something unique, I just wanted to have a placeholder in the agenda.
Thank you. Hearing no further questions or comments at this point in
Why don't I
time.
make a motion to adjourn?
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Steve, please stay on this line.
Sure.
All right. So I will